This Friday, Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan are back to switch things up in Disney's Freakier Friday.
Totally, yes.
It's an absolute riot.
Woo!
And the only movie that can be described as...
So much weirder than the last time.
What last time?
It's the frequel.
You ready?
We've been waiting for.
That absolutely slays.
What deeply out-of-touch old person came up with that?
You did.
Wow.
Don't miss the comedy event of the summer for all ages. Disney's Freakier Friday. In theaters this Friday. Get tickets now. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested.
This episode is brought to you by the world's first reposado from Tequila Herradura. Made with slow-cooked, hand-harvested agave sealed into oak barrels and aged 11 months. Before being enjoyed in your glass. Experience the world's first reposado. Tequila Herradura. Please drink responsibly. Responsibility.org. Tequila Herradura. 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Brown-Forman, Louisville, Kentucky. Herradura is a registered trademark. Copyright 2025 Brown-Forman Corporation.
Hey, it's Sydney Sweeney.
I'm not here to tell you to buy American Eagle jeans. And I definitely won't say that they're the most comfortable jeans I've ever worn. Or that they make your butt look amazing. Why would I need to do that? But if you said that you want to buy the jeans, I'm not going to stop you. But just so we're clear, this is not me telling you to buy American Eagle jeans.
Sydney Sweeney, Hasbro Jeans.
You see what I did there, right?
Pie in the Sky Media. This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence throughout. Listener discretion is advised. The views and opinions expressed on Criminal Mischief are just that, opinions. Everyone is presumed innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. Welcome back to Criminal Mischief with Carolyn and Brandon. You're listening to episode 124, an update on the Idaho student murders. It was early in the morning on November 13th, 2022. The secluded residence was home to University of Idaho students. It was bitterly cold outside with snow on the ground, typical for that time of year, but you could always see a bit of cheer from a neon sign in one of the windows that read, "Good vibes." But inside that 3-story home on King Road, something was terribly wrong. 4 University of Idaho students were in trouble. Ethan, Xana, Kaylee, and Maddie had no idea that something evil was headed their way. That night, there were 6 people in the house overnight. Xana, Kaylee, and Maddie lived there with 2 other roommates. Ethan would stay over. He was Xana's boyfriend. The other 2 roommates, who would survive that night, would be identified in court documents as DM and BF. They were in their separate rooms at the residence, and none of the friends knew that just after 4 a.m., a man dressed in black, wearing a mask that covered his face except his eyes and bushy eyebrows, had crept inside. It's believed through a sliding glass door. DM told police how she woke up suddenly. After 4 a.m., her bedroom was on the 1st floor, but upstairs, she heard sounds coming from the 3rd, where Kaylee slept. It sounded like she was playing with her dog in her bedroom, but we know, because of a security camera near the home, that at 4:17 a.m., the camera picked up the sound of muffled voices and then a whimper, followed by a loud thud and a dog barking. From 4:22 to 4:24, DM was wide awake and frightened. She texted Kaylee, asking her, "What's going on?" but got no reply. She texted the other students in the house as well, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan, but there was no response. However, BF, alone in her room, would respond to DM's text at 4:22 when she said, "No one is answering. I'm really confused right now." DM tells BF that outside of her room she saw what looked like a man with a ski mask in the house, wearing all black. Information that prompted BF to tell DM to run to her room so they could at least be together. What DM and BF couldn't begin to fathom was that their friends, Ethan, Xana, Kaylee, and Maddie, had just been stabbed to death in a blitz attack, and that the man, dressed in black, who had just run past DM, was the murderer fleeing the scene. After a 2-month manhunt, Moscow police arrested 28-year-old Brian Kohberger while he was visiting his family in Pennsylvania on 4 counts of first-degree murder. Kohberger was a graduate student in criminal justice who went to Washington State University, which was close to the University of Idaho. Kohberger has pleaded not guilty to all charges, but if convicted, he faces the death penalty. Even though this has been a widely publicized case with a highly anticipated trial scheduled for this summer, there has been a pervasive veil of secrecy blanketed over a very heavily sealed case. Despite both the prosecution and defense filing motions that are a part of the court docket, but most of these documents are sealed. Even hearings in the courtroom have been sealed and closed to the public.
If there's something you need to protect some individual's privacy other than the defendant or something else going on, then maybe, but it should be rare. And at this point, especially, I mean, he's charged, everybody knows who he is. It should be rare to seal documents like that. And it shouldn't automatically be approved.
That's retired Seattle police detective Cloyd Steiger. Cloyd worked 22 years as a homicide detective and is also the author of Homicide, The View from Inside the Yellow Tape, a true crime memoir. Now, in a murder case, both the defense and prosecution can ask the judge to seal a motion, and then the judge makes a decision. The presumption in this case is that all this sealing is happening to minimize pretrial publicity so they can get an objective jury. But the amount of sealing in this case is highly unusual, even with the amount of publicity.
Matter of fact, I saw something the other day where the judge said, no, too much of this is a secret.
But recently, some of these sealed documents from both the defense and the prosecution have been unsealed. And today, we're going to go over the case, at least some of what we know so far, and Cloyd will share some of his insights.
People ask me about this case all the time, and I've read stuff about it, and I've read the affidavits and things like that. I don't follow any murder cases closely because, I mean, that's what I did for a living. I'm not going to do it for fun. But people ask me all the time, based on things I'm hearing, I can give you an educated guess about what probably happened or how it probably went and what was probably going through his mind and things like that, and his background and what I think his motivation is and things like that.
But you should know, in a senseless crime like this, where 4 young people were slaughtered, even when we find out everything related to the case during the trial in August, it won't help us make sense of what happened to these kids.
When people ask you about it, even though you're not involved in it whatsoever, it just kind of shows the concentric circles of a case like this.
Right.
How people are just, they want answers. Do you think that's what they want to understand? Even if it's
right.
someone, of course you have all this experience. Our human beings just want to know why. We want to understand how.
Well, this case in particular, I tell people it's because this is the case that people say it could have been anybody. It could have been me. It could have been my daughter in school or my son in school. Because these guys were the University of Idaho in Moscow, Idaho, which is a really low crime area. Most of their crime is juvenile drinking and things like that. And you'd think they'd be safe, and it happened there. Now, if it happened in the University of Washington area, people wouldn't have been so shocked. They would have still been shocked, but not as much as Idaho. And that's why it chills people to their bones that their families could have been the victims of this. And unfortunately for the 4 families that were, they didn't get the chance to say, oh, it could have been me. It was them.
After 2.5 years, even the motivation behind the slayings isn't fully clear. What would drive the alleged killer, Brian Kohberger, to break into their home in the early morning hours and murder 4 people? We know Kohberger followed all 3 young women on social media apps.
This guy was somebody obsessed with one of these girls and went in there and was probably an incel.
And an incel is defined as a male who is a member of an online community of young men who consider themselves unable to attract women sexually and are typically associated with views that are hostile towards women and men who are sexually active. We also know that Kohberger was a teacher's assistant at Washington State University, and that a couple of weeks before the murders, he was warned by professors that he was going to lose his job because he was treating the female students differently than their male counterparts, that he was putting down women. Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan were amazing people who were excellent students, good-looking, popular, and fun, just the kind of cool kids an incel would hate.
and couldn't have a relationship with a girl like that, and was frustrated and just fantasized about him, and then thought he'd do this, and then fantasized through it. Thought he did a great job, but he didn't. They never do. It's too hard. First of all, it's too hard in this bloody of a scene, in this crazy of a scene. You cannot prevent leaving evidence there. You can't. And he was so mixed. That's why he left his night sheet there. I mean, he probably had it in his hand and took it off and set it down and forgot about it and left. And his phone shows him coming back a couple hours later. He probably thought about going in to look for it, but was afraid to get caught because he knew that was a bad deal, leaving that there.
We'll get to that knife sheath in a bit. But Cloyd says that when he heard the details about the murders for the first time, of course he'd formed his own ideas about who he thought the killer could be based on his experience.
You thought ahead of time that this could be an incel? Like, what is up with you guys?
Because of the girls and things, and they're attractive young college students, and I was even, and once I saw who it was, then I was even more convinced that was the case. But yeah,
why do you say that?
Well, because look at him. He's obviously socially awkward. He's got all kinds of things going on. He would, like, I understand, text one of the victims and say something, didn't get responses back, which really frustrated him. And that's whoever the one who suffered the worst injuries, and mostly to the face and things like that, that's the one he was obsessed with. Not that he couldn't have been obsessed with more than one of them, but the one that got the most injuries is the one he was most obsessed with.
Cloyd's perception of Kohberger and how the jury could potentially view their client's demeanor is what prompted them to file a motion recently, arguing that the death penalty should be straight up taken off the table. Now, that didn't mean that Kohberg was saying he was guilty, but the defense argued that Kohberger was recently evaluated by a neuropsychologist who found he, quote, continued to exhibit all the core diagnostic features of ASD, or autism spectrum disorder. And that basically, through no fault of his own, having ASD would impede Kohberger from getting a fair trial because of how the jury might perceive his demeanor and or lack of emotion in court. We also know that Kohberger had earned a master's degree in criminal justice. That fall, he had moved to Pullman to begin his first semester at Washington State University toward a PhD in criminology. According to court records, Kohberg's prior research included questions posed to criminals, such as why they chose their victim and how did they approach them and how they left the scene of the crime. Cloyd says the biggest mistake killers make is believing they can outsmart investigators.
The killer passed a girl coming out of her room and just didn't even see her, I guess, and just walked past.
Right.
What kind of frenzy describe kind of what?
Because he is in such a stressful situation, an absolute stress. You get tunnel vision, so he can only see straight ahead. He didn't even see her, I bet. He never noticed her. She saw him because she wasn't under stress, but he was under super stress because he didn't realize what he'd gotten himself into, and it was way more than he could deal with. So he had tunnel vision. That happens in all kinds of stressful situations, shootouts and things like that. You get tunnel vision, and you don't see things to the side unless you turn your head. And he didn't see her because he was so freaked out and stressed.
How did the person who did this, if it is Kohberger, think he was going to get away with this? Because as you said, you can't go to commit a crime like this and not leave some kind of DNA behind, even if you're unless you're like in a bubble.
Yeah, but even then I've never seen one that didn't leave something. But the thing is, it's because he read a lot of books. But reading a lot of books isn't the same as doing it, right? It doesn't. He thought he knew what he was doing, but he didn't.
On WhatsApp, no one can see or hear your personal messages. Whether it's a voice call, message, or sending a password. To WhatsApp, it's all just this. So whether you're sharing the streaming password in the family chat or trading those late-night voice messages that could basically become a podcast, your personal messages stay between you, your friends, and your family. No one else. Not even us. WhatsApp. Message privately with everyone.
It's Wednesday, Adams. I see you're trying to distract yourself from your own banal thoughts. Let me help. Here's a recording thing made of my latest root canal.
Wednesday Season 2 is now playing only on Netflix.
Una silla de masajes puede parecer extravagante. 8 configuraciones diferentes, intensidad ajustable, además es calefaccionado. Y se siente tan bien. Sí, una silla de masajes puede parecer extravagante. Y 2, bueno, aún más. Pero cuando esas sillas de masajes vienen con un auto, se vuelven bastante prácticas. El nuevo Volkswagen Tiguan 2025 con funciones premium como los asientos delanteros con masaje disponibles. Solo parece extravagante.
This episode is brought to you by Wayfair. Podcasts follow us everywhere. Whether you're cooking in the kitchen, chilling in the living room, or pretending to fold laundry in the bedroom. And with Wayfair, every one of those rooms can tell a story of its own. Their curated collections of furniture styles and prices make Wayfair the trusted destination to turn your home into your happy place. Shop everything home at wayfair.com with free and easy delivery straight to your door.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
So let's get back to that knife sheath that was found at the crime scene. Male DNA was recovered from a small metal clasp on the knife case that was found near one of the victims' bodies. When investigators submitted the DNA profile to CODIS, the National Offender DNA Database, there wasn't a match. Now, the arrest affidavit provided a lot of information about how they tracked a white Hyundai that they believed was the suspect's car, and suspicious phone records of Brian Kohberger's. But something that was never mentioned in that 18-page affidavit was how they zeroed in on Brian Kohberger, and that was through investigative genetic genealogy, or IgG. Because investigators don't think of IgG as a suspect identification, it's just a tip.
But it doesn't matter. That's not evidence in this case. That just points, that's no different than you having, putting out a bulletin, hey, we're looking for a guy who drives this kind of car, and me picking up my phone and saying, you know, my neighbor drives that kind of car, and you start looking at the neighbor. It's no different. The evidence is when they finally swab his cheek and compare it directly to the DNA found at the scene. How they got there is not evidence. It's just a lead. And whether they did something they shouldn't have, it's not something that the court has to suppress for it.
IgG has become a big issue in this case because at the beginning of the year, the defense argued that the DNA evidence should be thrown out as fruit from the poisonous tree. Because to get to Brian Kohberger's name, through genetic genealogy, the FBI accessed 2 consumer databases whose terms of service excluded law enforcement access, which also was a violation of the FBI's own internal policy related to IgG. The defense also argued that the surreptitious sample collected from Kohberger's parents' home in Pennsylvania, that profile belonged to his father, which connected him to Kohberger, violated his constitutional rights because a warrant hadn't been secured to do so.
The defense put forth a motion January 23rd to throw out the DNA evidence related to the sheath, the knife sheath that had on the button his DNA.
When that happened, I said, there's zero chance that that's going to get suppressed.
The judge ruled against the motion to suppress that evidence. And as far as the FBI potentially violating their own policy related to IgG searches, the judge made a note that the policy was, quote, internal guidance, and any alleged violation, quote, is not of constitutional importance.
The defense didn't expect it to get suppressed, but they just have to throw things against the wall and see if something sticks, right? Because it's so damning that's up there. They're left to these Hail Mary attempts, and they're never going to do it. I predicted that the judge will not suppress this evidence. It's too probative. They say, well, that sheath could have been left there underneath the victim's body. And why don't you get up here and tell us when you were there and left your knife sheath there? And it happens to be the sheath for the same kind of knife that was involved in these murders. What are the odds of that? That's not going to happen.
No,
but if they had more evidence, if they had more DNA evidence, then they couldn't, because there'd be all these sources of evidence. And even if you suppress one thing, there's 10 other things you have in, even though they're not going to suppress it.
This case is a largely circumstantial one. Other than that knife sheath, at the moment, there's no physical evidence tying Kohberger to the murders. But Cloyd believes more potential evidence could be there if investigators would have used a newer technology called MVAC.
I don't know this for sure, that this evidence was done by the FBI crime lab. And people think, oh, FBI crime lab, they're cutting edge. And usually that's not the case at all. In this case, from what I've read, they're using 20th century techniques in a 21st century murder. They need to get off the schnoz and do things like the MVAC. And I mean, they found DNA, sure, but they would have found out, they can still MVAC the victim's clothing and see if his DNA is on there, because he was probably sweating like a pig. And he got his sweat on their clothing. And even if he's wearing gloves, he's going to get his DNA on them. And so they should go back and do that with an MVAC, And I know that the FBI has no MVACs. I know that the Idaho State Police have no MVACs. But I happen to know that the president and CEO of MVAC, when this first happened, called and volunteered to donate a unit and come up there and do it, have somebody do it for them, but never heard back. So, okay, an MVAC is a liquid vacuum DNA collection method. And what it does, it wasn't originally designed for forensic use at all. It was originally designed to find bacteria in food for like E. coli and things like that. But when they tested, they found so much, none of the food manufacturers want anything to do with it because they found it everywhere. And so, and then somebody said, maybe you could use that forensically. So they did. And what it does is it blasts a sterile liquid into the evidence. Or you can do it on human skin too. So it'll do it onto the skin. And then it sucks it back up and puts it into a container. And then that container, the liquid is poured through a filter. And then that filter is tested for DNA. And the FBI actually did a study on it and found that it was like, I forgot the number. It was like 2,700% more DNA is collected than cutting and swabbing, which ironically is the method that the FBI used in this case. And so they were going to order a bunch of them and then they canceled. And so I'm not sure what's going on with that, but they need to go back and do that because that would nail this case down if you find his DNA on the victim's clothing and things like that. It's not too late. They can still do it.
Speaking of new evidence, in a recent motion filed, it was revealed that a 3-person mixture of unknown DNA was found under Maddie's fingernails, which 2 years after the murders seems to prove Cloyd's point. Not necessarily with the MVAC, but that there's evidence that we don't know about yet. And also at an open hearing, unknown DNA that doesn't belong to Kohberger was collected from a handrail inside the home, and outside on the property, there was a glove. Here, Court TV captured defense attorney Ann Taylor.
What other explanation is there? The magistrate wasn't given a chance to ask that. She wasn't given a chance to ask that when she wasn't told about unknown male B, blood on the handrail. She wasn't given a chance to ask about that when she wasn't told about unknown male D, blood on a glove right outside the residence. She wasn't given a chance to ask any of those questions.
They already have found other DNA at this house. They make a big deal of it. So what? People are in and out of the house. There's a bunch of DNA inside that house. But how do you link that to the murder?
I think that what they're trying to do is basically say, you were so hot because of this tip that you got, and you went into this database when you shouldn't have, because it went against that potential database's privacy laws. It stopped you from looking at some of the other people, and you focused on him.
Yeah. This is what I say all the time. If I'm driving in a city I don't know, and I'm driving on the road and I want to get the freeway, it says freeway next left. I don't go, I wonder if it's down here or to the right. You follow the evidence. You got a knife sheath of a knife that matches the kind that was used in the murder. I mean, it's not like jumping to conclusions. That's just following the evidence.
It's believed that a large part of the defense will be to challenge DNA evidence, its legality and accuracy step by step. The defense recently hired an attorney who specializes in investigative genetic genealogy, so even though the DNA evidence collected on the knife sheath wasn't suppressed, how they got to Kohberger through IgG will be, and if convicted, could be an appealable issue that could go on for years.
That's their only hope. They know that. These defense attorneys aren't stupid. They know that he's going to go to trial and he's going to be convicted and everything's going to rest on an appeal. That's where they're looking for all this stuff. That's why they're doing all these motions, hoping that the judge or somebody else makes a mistake that can be reversed on appeal. That doesn't mean he'll be found set free. It may mean he has to go back and do the trial all over again, but it probably won't be. Because the prosecutors know this too, and the judge knows this.
Because the defense or the death penalty is on the table, could potentially be on the table.
Right. So this will be appealed for years and years and years.
There's also a school of thought that the entire effort isn't necessarily to just win at trial, but to also create a brand new constitutional right of privacy protection under the US Constitution when it comes to IgG and using the DNA of someone else's, including relatives. Because DNA used for IgG has the potential to reveal biomedical details like genetic risks such as addiction, cancer, heart disease, and many more. Now, law enforcement does not use this information. They just want to identify their suspect. But the defense could also be setting up the possibility that a higher court would adopt a law saying IgG invades people's privacy. So far, IgG for the most part hasn't been challenged in this way during a trial.
A larger conversation that's being had right now is what they refer to as investigative IgG or investigative genetic genealogy, and that the defense could also be laying the groundwork for a brand new constitutional right of privacy protection about not being able to use the DNA of someone else, including relatives. So they're trying to potentially, put the genie back in the bottle, so to speak. What do you think of this?
I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen because it doesn't really impede the privacy. The person getting it doesn't even, he knows who the person is, but they don't identify that person. And then they just follow a genetic trail. And it's not all DNA. It might be just, I always say that geneticists are like the true murder she wrote, little old lady solving murders, because they are, a lot of them are. And they're following, birth records and death records. And, males, you're looking for that Y chromosome. And the Y chromosome is the same all the way up and down your male. Your father, your grandfather, your great-great-great-great-grandfather all have the same one. So you're going through and you're looking for who currently has this Y profile. And then you look for that person. And is it somebody, if there's more than one, is there a reason this one couldn't be the person? Yeah, because he's clear across the country, or he's dead or whatever. And this guy happens to be very close physically to the victims. And then they do their due diligence and try to get a DNA sample some other way to match it enough to get it where you can arrest him and then do a one-on-one cheek swab. And that's ultimately, it leads to the same thing. Not only does this convict the guilty, it absolutely exonerates the innocent. That's the good thing about it,
isn't that
if you're not the
incredible?
guy, it's going to show you're not the guy. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's what I love about this technology.
Oh yeah,
it's that
it eliminates you as a suspect if you're not guilty.
The defense won a motion to move the case 300 miles away from where the murders took place to Boise, Idaho. The trial is scheduled for August and is expected to last 3 months. We will definitely keep you posted. Up next, criminal mischief bonus content. Here, my co-host, Brandon Morgan, and I discuss the case in more detail. And don't forget, the show is now available on YouTube, so check us out and subscribe to Criminal Mischief with Carolyn and Brandon. And as always, thanks for listening. From Cloud 10, Criminal Mischief is a pie-in-the-sky production recorded in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. We're produced by Brandon Morgan and myself, music by Soundstripe. I'm Carolyn Osorio, your writer and host.